everybody, and welcome to Eggs, the podcast, featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. Today, we have special guest Mark Stouse, CEO of Proof Analytics. Mark is an award-winning B2B CMO and CCO who connects all types of marketing investment to revenue, margin, and cash flow impact in complex, long-cycle companies. Today, we'll chat with Mark about a number of topics, including marketing innovation and revenue optimization, as well as how to utilize marketing to deliver measurable business results. We'll also be discussing his company's marketing analytics platform and their powerful Proof Business GPS, which guides companies through the whole marketing lifecycle and provides complete picture of their marketing efforts. Sit back, relax, and let's get cracking with Mark Stouse on Eggs. Hey, Mark, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate you making time for us.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I guess, Mark, let's start a little bit at the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about just sort of your entrepreneurial journey. Let's start, I don't know how far back you'd like to go, but if you can talk about sort of the time before today, what you're doing, it would be really great to kind of give us some color to your career.
Yeah, sure. I mean, actually, my very first foray into being an entrepreneur was in the early 1990s in a completely different market sector. It was created a defense contractor, and it was all about hardware and supply chains and global supply chains and all that kind of stuff, and the reality of dealing with governments. And so it was very, very different than Proof. And it was, one of the things that I will say, and I think that this will resonate with anybody who's ever been an entrepreneur, is that you learn a ton, right? Whatever knowledge you had going in is definitely not what you needed to know when you started. and you're going to be learning it, in huge amounts, big lumps of knowledge. You're going to be acquiring it at speed for as long as you are an entrepreneur. And so we after 7 years, we successfully exited that company to a large defense industry player. And then for the next, 20 years or so, well, maybe a little less than that, 18 years, I went corporate, right? I was anything but an entrepreneur, but I was definitely intrapreneurial in all of those jobs, right? And that's ultimately kind of like from a more of a human side of my professional walk. That's what brought me to Proof. That's what led me to create Proof, was being an intrapreneur within these large companies.
Can we take a step back and actually talk about that first business, how you got into it, how did you go to college? Did you fall into it and it just happened to work out? That's kind of one of those industries where I don't think it's necessarily like, hey, I'm just going to wake up and make defense contract stuff. Like, it's kind of like,
what I mean? That's absolutely fair. So I was very, very political before that. So I had a lot of government connections, and then I had a lot of understanding for a whole bunch of different reasons. I had a pretty good understanding of things military, and then I bumped into a technology that was not being used in the military at all. But I immediately, for whatever reason, I'm not claiming any kind of special genius or understanding, but it immediately clicked with me that this could really be very, very interesting in that context. And so we started a very small R&D effort, and lo and behold, it actually was. I was exactly correct. One of the few times in my life I feel like I've been that correct. And so it just it's old hat now. I mean, we're talking about 25, almost 30 years later, right? But it's old hat now. But at the time, it was revolutionary, and the ensuing, that was 1992. The ensuing 7 years for me were kind of what I call my Walter Mitty years, where I got to live in a particular sort of way, militarily speaking, without having to pay the price of doing so. And so, but it was very instructive, right? I mean, I just, at the very end of the main so the defense industry is one of those industries where if you stay reasonably small and niche, right, the big players will totally not only tolerate you, but actually welcome you. But if you start to really kind of expand your presence at all, right, they start kind of saying, hey, you're not one of us, you're, and they're so wound up into the political structure that what happened to us is that all of a sudden we were notified by the U.S. Department of Defense, again, this is a long time ago, that our patents had special security, national security relevance, which is a code for essentially saying, I mean, they can't really do this in the United States, but in a de facto way, it would have been like the equivalent of nationalizing our patents. And that obviously would have not been good for the valuation of the company. And then about a month later, we magically got an offer from one of the big defense industry players to buy us. And we just knew that if we said no, that the next go around would be for a lot less. And so we took it.
Yeah, no, that's really, I mean, it's kind of scary, interesting. It's a lot of things, but I wonder, so would you have characterized yourself prior to getting into that kind of work? I'm always fascinated with people's tolerance for risk, right? Because it seems, I mean, yeah, you had an interest in politics and military and things like that. So maybe it was a logical progression for you. But would you have considered yourself entrepreneurial? And for me, a characteristic of being an entrepreneur is not necessarily being risk averse, but being willing to take a risk or spot an opportunity like that and take it. So would you have considered yourself as always sort of having been entrepreneurial prior to that? Or was it just, a matter of circumstances and just kind of worked out?
No, I think that and I come from kind of a line of people like this, right? So who knows how much of this is genetic versus environmental and all that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, I think particularly looking back on it now with all this hindsight, I think all the way back into my early teens, right, I was showing a lot of entrepreneurial signs. I don't think that you think about it, you're even aware of it conceptually at that age, other than some sort of paper route or something like that, right? And you're not really seeing it at that level in terms of risk. I mean, you don't even really understand it in terms of opportunity cost. Like the time that I spend on this paper route is time that I can't spend on something else. That's not typically part of a conscious decision. And actually, I think that the whole idea of opportunity cost is absolutely crucial to the entrepreneurial journey. And it's the one part of the entrepreneurial journey that does not get the attention that it should. Because if you make the wrong bet, you're actually a two-time loser.
Yeah.
Right? You lost what you spent your time and money and effort on, and you lost what you could have spent it on, right? And that is non-trivial, right? Particularly when you look at it in the context of, we all have a finite amount of time on this earth, and only a certain percentage of that can actually be devoted to work or being an entrepreneur, right? And so how you spend your time is a undervalued idea. I think largely because it happens so incrementally.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
I mean, like one of the most profound things that I ever heard about this was from a Jesuit priest he's a philosopher deluxe, right? And he and I were talking about this issue and kind of more broadly. And he said, look, he goes, what's going to really help you focus your attention on this issue effectively is to not say, well, I probably have another 30 years or whatever, right? Say I have 30 more summers. I have 30 more Christmases. I have 30 more Thanksgivings, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I want to spend each one of those?
Yeah, that kind of just thinking of it that way, like 30 more Christmases, 30 more summers, like
it really shortens
that really kind of
it
shortens it. It really does. Because 30 years seems like a long time, but 30, it actually having it ticking like, okay, I got 29, 28, 20, so on and so forth. But
yeah, no, and it's like, I mean, my kids are now, one's 18 and one's getting ready to be 16. And living here in Arizona, I mean, I've lost track of how many times I've vacationed on the beach in Southern California. And I love that. Okay. But honestly, the last thing I want to do is do it again. I want to go someplace new, right? Or at least someplace that I haven't seen in quite some time. I'd settle for that too, right? And so, I don't want to be in a rut, and so hauling this back into the entrepreneurial life again, I think that you always have to say, and this is where it's hard, right, as an entrepreneur, because you typically fall in love with whatever you're doing. But you can't really allow yourself to do that. You have to see it as this has got to pay off, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? Within, and this is where it's intensely personal, and I can't tell anybody what that period of time is for them, right? But it's got to pay off in this period of time in order for it to be worth it. And it's got to pay off to this degree in this amount of time in order for it to be worth it. I think also the last thing I would just say about this, because I think it is really fascinating, just as a standalone topic, is a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly in tech, they want the home run, right? They want to sell for $1 trillion. I'm exaggerating, obviously, for effect, right? But they want a huge multiple. They just And the reality is that if you sell for even 25% more than you could have made had you stayed in the career that you were in corporately for the same amount of time, you are substantially ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, we all want more than that, but I'm just saying that the issue here is really also is your current startup your only good idea? Or do you have other good ideas, right? So then if that's the case, right, becomes more about a whole bunch of base hits in terms of exits. That's going to produce the life-altering wealth, right? Not the single grand slam home run, which is pretty unlikely anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really interesting perspective, because you're right. And actually, it's something that Mike and I have stumbled across a lot on the show is, as we interview these leaders and CEOs, everybody who's coming into this program anyway is a CEO who's established, who has a career, who has probably a track record of maybe these base hits or maybe a couple of home runs. It's really easy to look at them in the present and go, oh, okay, well, overnight. This is what it should be for me too. Like, oh, well, you've got a successful startup, so should I, right? Like, I'm going to launch my, 10 million, 10 million, 10 billion, $10 trillion deal, right? And so there seems to be this compression of time that that entrepreneurs deal with these days, where they're putting pressure on themselves to knock it out of the park, like you mentioned, sort of hit that home run the first time. When the reality of almost every person's career we've spoken to is this layering of lots of base hits, or lots of education, or lots of tries and fails, or lots of whatevers, right? I don't even know if there's one that was just like a first try made it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point.
And I think that, there's a number of things that conspire, particularly in tech, to produce what you're talking about, right? But one of them for sure is VC investment, right? Because their whole model is based upon a very rapid growth curve, the hockey stick, and being able to potentially exit before churn becomes an issue, right? And so this creates a situation where businesses are not sustainable businesses. They're spending way too much money, way too fast. The burn rates are totally nuts. And then they don't have the runway typically to deal with the kinds of situations that come up. I mean, SVB, right? Silicon Valley Bank, right? Great example, and they have so much concentrated risk that something like an SVB, right, just completely throws them for a loop. I mean, how many startups had all of their cash in SVB?
They're really a unique case for that reason.
Setting aside all other forms of risk, for just a second, that kind of concentration of risk, is antithetical to good investment policy, right? I mean, if you're running your own 401k or your own investment fund, right? What are you encouraged to do? Diversify, right? Have redundancy, have all this kind of stuff, because it bears against risk.
Yeah. Well, and even minimally, just FDIC insurance, right? I mean, like, okay, why would you keep $30 million in a checking account? Like, there's no protection in a normal world. Apparently now we protect it, but until now we didn't protect it. And so it's like, so why were you putting, all those eggs in the single basket, and also just, from the bank's perspective, it seems like a horrible model, like to just take VC money and hold on to money for all these people, but, for the very reasons you just described, people are buying and flipping businesses, and they're, trying to get these big returns, but so many of them lose. And, it's like, it doesn't even seem like a good customer base to have if you're that bank.
So this is actually one of the things that we see in the analytics world, right? Is number one, people believe that past is prologue. They actually believe that whether it's good or bad, but particularly when it's been really great, they think it's just extensible forever, right? It's fascinating to watch customers create models early in the relationship, because these models have no externalities in them. It's all the stuff that they're doing that they control, right? And we have to kind of sit down and say, hey, you might want to think about all the externalities that you don't control, because you're the surfer, you're not the wave.
Yeah.
Right. And so, your reaction time, your sensitivity to what's going on with the wave, your ability the feedback loops between the wave and you, right? And your ability to make good decisions that's what separates wiping out from, a beautiful flourishing finish on the beach. Right. So, this is key, and you're not existing in a vacuum, but people it's just human nature. I mean, they just don't naturally do that. You have to train them to do that. It's been probably one of the most powerful things for me, right? Because I mean, one of the other things I've learned about entrepreneurship is that it will make you a better person, whether you like it or not. Right. And so I have learned so much about the reality of my place in the world as a human being from analytics. I control so little, which, far from being an excuse, actually makes it even more important that I do what I can control really, really well.
Well, it's such an interesting perspective, because I mean, if you think about it just in terms of what's been going on in the last 5 years, let's say, right? I mean, it's funny how short our memories are, right? I mean, so you're talking about the wave. Well, I mean, in just the last 3 to 5 years, like there was no wave, like literally no wave to ride. Like you had to take a year of doing nothing, right? So like, how could you have possibly accounted for that, But now it's a reality. But it's funny because you see people jumping, right back into the same things. And you're seeing, like with this SVB stuff, one of the things that's happening on the other side of that is sort of a bump in the crypto stuff again. And so, to your point earlier about, people not really, or, they're sort of, I guess, forgetting what things were, right? I mean, crypto did crash horrifically last year, but because it was once successful, they are now looking at it again as somehow being safer than the regular banks. And, and I'm not a financial guy, maybe it is, but, I'm just noticing in the little bit of crypto that I didn't totally wipe out on, it's, now all of a sudden bouncing back with all this instability in the financial system. But it's like, but we just saw how unstable that was too. So it's like, it's funny to see people just sort of, like goldfish, we're just on to the next thing.
So, I mean, I think it's super important to say this, right? You cannot make a ton of money in a business absent a substantial amount of risk.
Yeah.
Risk is the lever, right? Which basically means it can also go the other way, right? You can lose monstrously, right? And so that's where the tolerance, going back to the top of your question, right? I mean, yeah, and I think that you learn, it's not just psychological, like, can you handle the risk levels? Yeah, you also have to learn to handle the risk levels, like technically as well as psychologically, right?
So you coming out of your defense contract deal, you come into the corporate world. I'm sure you learned a lot in that first go around, how to analyze stuff and how to go. Has analytics always been kind of like your passion? Have you always kind of had your finger on that pulse, or is it something you learned through your role in the corporate world that I need to be paying attention to this. I need to be paying attention to this. These are the metrics that are important. These are the metrics that can, sit over here for a minute. Like, where did you get that knowledge? Was it through your first business or was it through your time in corporate world?
I think it was certainly in my first business that, because, you're just exposed to so many metrics and, the whole counting piece and all this kind of stuff. Right. And so that's certainly part of it. I think that the irony here is, and if any of my high school math teachers are listening to this podcast, sorry, but, I did not have the best math teachers in school. And so consequently, I didn't like it.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that I was bad at it. I just thought it sucked. Right. And so I was far more known for being able to write really well and speak really well and be very creative, whatever that means, right? And I don't mean that in an artistic way because I'm crap as right, but
that's what we got Ryan for,
right? So I mean, so it's a so I think that what prompted Proof in the end, because there was a huge run up on the corporate side for me personally that led to Proof, was a search for significance within the corporate environment, large corporate environment, because I was a marketer, and we all know what that means in most large corporations, right? Everyone's always questioning your value. Everyone, you don't know how to prove your value because you haven't really, particularly in a B2B kind of context, which is where I spent most of my career, a lot of times you haven't grappled or even thought of the real issues that are in play, right? So for example, time lag. The time lag effect in B2B is probably the CMO's greatest enemy, right? Because it totally masks the impact, right? You can't see it because the feedback loops are so lengthy, right? So if you're not calculating the impact in an analytical way, right, you're just going to totally miss it. And so is everybody else, right? I mean, like there's no exceptions to this. And so it was when all of a sudden I started actually revisiting my high school math textbooks, right, that I re-encountered regression modeling, right? I mean, this is all like really basic stuff. I mean, there's not anything at all profound about this. There's no magic math. There's nothing like this at all. So I started really learning it and then implementing it, and did that pretty steadily across several companies with great success. And then based on that, there was some really great trade press about what we had accomplished. And Dave Cody, who was at that time the chairman and CEO of Honeywell International, evidently read one of those articles and says, I want to talk to that guy, meaning me. And so he hired me to be the chief marketing officer for Honeywell Aerospace.
Wow.
And which was sort of like the ultimate acid test for all the work and analytics that we had ever done to that point, because Honeywell Aerospace was so diversified. There was so much going on. It was very complex. We're talking about close to 900 product families. I mean, it was insane, and global, right? And 12 billion in revenue, and, highly regulated. And I mean, it just had all the factors. And so we started rolling out this analytics, and it was extremely successful, but it was extremely expensive, like $8-9 million a year, and just on the analytics side, and it was totally worth it. I mean, like everybody agreed this was totally worth that kind of money. But the main reason why we were having to do that, and because that was almost all over hiring data science talent, right? And we did that in order to get the throughput faster, the analytical throughput, because this is the issue, not just for marketers, but for all analytics in a business context. It's too damn slow, right? Yeah. So it's always late to the game. It's not moving at the clock speed of the business. An analog to this would be you're in a fighter plane, but all of your instruments are lagged 30 minutes. So how would that work?
Yeah, even in a fighter plane, it's not even 30 minutes. It's 3 seconds. It's
absolutely. Yeah.
That kind of latency is a problem. Can I ask?
That's the automation play right there.
Can I ask, when you came into a role like that's a significant role. How do you decide what data points you're focusing on? How do you decide what analytics? There's so many moving parts, so many different things. I guess you have core objectives that you're trying to accomplish and that you're trying
absolutely.
to see. Were they laid out for you, or did you kind of have to come in blind and figure out what you need to go for? I mean, like that, there's so many moving parts in a company like that. I think just the first week I would be so overwhelmed. Like, what do I do?
Yeah, no, I think number one, you always have to have really transparent conversations with the rest of your business colleagues. In my case, the rest of the C-suite at Aerospace, right? About what are they really caring about the most? And obviously, the top three in any business are going to be revenue, margin, and cash flow.
Sure.
And so you start to say, okay, the core question is, how does marketing, net of all these externalities, how is marketing multiplying? So let me back up. Marketing is a non-linear multiplier of linear areas of business performance. One of those would be sales. Sales is a very linear function, right? Marketing is not. In fact, that was the whole concept. That's the whole idea behind modern marketing in the very first part of it, right? 100 years ago, was how do we get leverage in the marketplace beyond hiring more and more and more sales guys, right? And so we were saying, okay, what is the multiplier for marketing at Honeywell Aerospace on everything that on the sales front contributes to revenue or margin or cash flow? The reality is that in Honeywell's case, they were already doing business with everybody who mattered in the aerospace industry. So the idea of a net new logo was a very rare concept. And so what you're really talking about is deepening the share of wallet in customers, individual customers across a relatively wide swath of the industry. And so that made op income the number one metric at Honeywell Aerospace, which it was. The other thing, though, that was really interesting is that I have come to believe that the low-hanging fruit for marketers in many, many cases is not the top of the funnel, meaning more leads. It is actually the bottom of the funnel, meaning how are you accelerating average deal velocity? How are you making it possible to close deals faster and faster and faster? Because that is a one-to-one mainline connection with cash flow from revenue. So if you're closing deals on average faster and faster, that means you're invoicing them faster and faster, you're getting the collections faster and faster, right? And all of a sudden cash flow from revenue just goes super positive, right? And your CFO will just love you to bits if that's your only contribution.
Sure.
And so we believed, our hypothesis at the beginning at Honeywell was that even though it was a regulated industry and even though everybody kind of doubted that this was the case, that we could improve average deal velocity about anywhere from 4 to 5% over a 2-year period of time. And that ended up being pretty much dead on, which is sort of rare that you're dead on. So we got $11-12 billion, revenue moving about 4.5% faster,
which is huge,
which is monstrously huge. And to give you a sense of just how huge, the CFO of Honeywell Aerospace at that time is now on my board at Proof, solely on the strength of that experience, right? So, I mean, it's a reverse engineering kind of concept here to really get to the heart of your question at a higher level, right? You can't start with your data, which is where everybody always wants to start. You have to start with the question that needs to be answered or the decision that has to be made, and then you reverse engineer. So it's the scientific method of inquiry, right? Okay. You're reverse engineering through a model framework into a model. The model specifies the data sets that are needed to arm that particular model, and then you're off to the races. And then what we did was we applied agile methodology. So instead of a waterfall, which in analytics has been historically the big mega model, right?
Mm-hmm.
We broke it down into the minimum viable model and have tons of those, which then you can federate together if you need to answer an even bigger question. But it allows you to collaborate between the analyst and the business leader much more easily, more clearly, much faster. You're able to get to a model that the business guy can say, yes, that is answering my question. That is creating value for me, right? And then you put it in production. Because at the end of the day, and this is the other thing that's probably really important to say, and there's so much we could say about this, but the goal for analytics in business is not hyper accuracy. It is low latency with just good enough accuracy to make an incrementally better decision over and over and over again, right? So that the law of compounding comes into play. So, for example, let's just say you had a decision that you had to make every day, and you made it 0.25% better every day for 1 year. That's roughly, my math is correct, that's about 1,000% annualized improvement. I mean, that's a home run by anybody's standards, right? 500% would be a home run, right? So the amount of accuracy that you have to have is actually not what a lot of data scientists are taught that it needs to be. So this academic definition of data science accuracy is actually completely unworkable in a business context because the business is not even remotely that accurate. So you're trying to jam a high accuracy calculation approach into what is inherently a very dynamic, low accuracy, should be low latency situation. This is why business leaders just throw their hands up and go, these analysts are driving me insane, right? And they're always late, right? This is why that is, right? And so what you're really seeing right now in the data science community is the beginnings of a big shift on this issue, right? Because it's so clear that the academic kind of cult of precision approach that they've pursued isn't paying off for the business.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. You always hear things like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good or whatever, as it pertains to, just getting out and doing something. Like, you could sit and analyze things, or I guess the analysis paralysis thing, right? It's exactly that. Right. It's this idea that you can just spin the wheels all day long and never actually do anything. But in a business environment, obviously, that's not the way to do it. And so that's a really interesting perspective. I haven't heard anybody talk about analytics in that way before.
The GPS is actually a great illustration of this, right? Could it locate you within 12 inches of your actual location? Yes, it could. Is it worth that kind of cost to do that as opposed to within a 50-meter circle, right? No, it's not, right? Even a 50-foot circle, right, is more than enough to accuracy to get you from A to B.
Yeah. And I think to your point, it has to do with, that latency problem, right? Yes, we could pinpoint you down to, the inch, but it will take more time. And by then you're on to the next inch and the next inch and the next inch. So you're getting bad delayed data that's no good anymore. You're not back there anymore. Now you're over there. And so, by doing these, I guess, less refined or, this further out view, you're actually able to be, in a way, more accurate.
Yeah. And actually, our software works. The models represent to the customers very much like a GPS, right?
Okay.
And so it's just constantly recalculating, right? And so you're able to see, for example, if there's deltas that are opening up between your forecast and reality. Okay, well, what's driving that? And then you can war game responses. So this would be analogous to the rerouting process and a GPS to get back on track. And that's really that's all that matters to the business leader. The rest of it is of very passing relevance and interest, right? And that's going to offend a lot of data scientists, but it's just the truth.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe then use that as a segue to start talking a little bit more about Proof and what you guys do. I mean, obviously you're talking about your experience at Honeywell and the great success you found in looking at analytics in a new way. Maybe it's a leap, but presumably this is sort of the early thoughts that became Proof. Can you talk about the transition out of sort of corporate life and deciding to go back into sort of a high risk entrepreneurial venture, taking what you've learned from corporate?
So before, in between my first entrepreneurial venture and Proof, right, or in between that and Honeywell, I was solidly in the software business, right? Okay. Big software companies. And they were all B2B, they were all enterprise B2B, and a lot of them tended to be focused on like the one right before Honeywell was BMC Software, and they were really known for data center automation. So that whole perspective was very much in my mind, right? When I went to Honeywell, and we got there, but it was a brute force solution. And I was sitting there going, there's got to be a better way, right? And clearly, it started to dawn on me that automation was the better way. Now, in the same way that you can't fully automate a data center, there's, that people have always said, oh, my goal is a lights out data center, right? No people. Mm-hmm. And that has proven to be very elusive concept. And the same thing is going to be true on the analytics side. It's not really about getting rid of people. It's about getting rid of too many people and leveraging automation, leveraging software to go fast with the right number of people, right? In this case, the right number of analysts. And so that was the big breakthrough for me. There was so much mythology though around in the data science community about, you can't automate this stuff. There's too much judgment, too much nuance.
Too many variables.
And you're just like, so then I went to this conference that literally, I can't even remember what it was about exactly, but it was not about climate change. But they had a very prominent researcher talking about his work in climate change, and his analytical bastion was multivariable regression. And what he was demonstrating was they could totally handle, the volume, the velocity, the volatility of change, the heterogeneity of factors. It could handle all of that. It was almost infinitely expansible, right? And so I was kind of like going, okay, all this stuff that I've been hearing from the data science community isn't true. This guy right here and all of his colleagues are demonstrating it on probably one of the thorniest issues that anyone's ever tackled analytically. So, and then you start, it's kind of like when you buy a new car and all of a sudden you see that car
everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. Right. So I started bumping into it with epidemiology, right? Same basic drill, right? They're using machine learning to find patterns in huge volumes of data, and then they are testing those patterns for causality using multivariable regression, right? And you're kind of like going, okay, you know what? I'm not going to take no for an answer on this deal. And so we created a really small LLC, kind of very reminiscent of, everyone probably has heard this, in news coverage, when somebody's thinking about running for the presidency, they always create an exploratory committee first, right? This was sort of like the exploratory committee for a potential startup. And so we started working on the IP. We built something that by where we are today was obviously very rudimentary, but it proved the point. It was good enough. I wouldn't have even called it a minimum viable product. I would have called it like a minimum viable technology. It wasn't even really a product. And but it totally demonstrated that this approach was extremely elastic. And so we got to, and we weren't using marketing data in this exploration because the only large amounts of very clean data with a known outcome that were available were like on the University of Michigan site for medical care, right? So this was all healthcare data. And we could download it for free, and it had a known outcome. And so when we started running the analytics, if our outcome matched the outcome, that was supposed to be there, right, then we were good. Because again, the math is the math. And it worked over and over and over and over and over again, right? And so that was when we knew that we had something really significant. But so one of the things that did not cross my mind, that I've kicked myself constantly forever about this, right, was you can't really build an MVP in analytics because your platform is either complete or it's not. And if it's not complete, nobody wants to really look at it until you've got it complete. So you pretty much have to, your MVP is really a complete V1. That took a lot longer to build than we ever thought. We were, in retrospect, very, very thankful. So we did not go VC. We went family office.
Sure.
And we had great family offices, still do, as investors. And, they were certainly very into accountability, but they had a completely different time scale in mind. And so they were very chilled out about the fact that it took 3 years to build this thing. And then we went into the market, right? And I think that we were actually ahead of the market in retrospect. And so we struggled for about 18 months, 2 years to get product market fit, mainly because of where the market was. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and all of a sudden there was huge amounts of variability and high velocity change swirling all over the place. And marketing channels that had worked great before were suddenly not working at all. New ones were springing up that were very COVID friendly, right? It was all this stuff, right? And that was a huge tailwind, not only for us, but for the analytics industry as a whole. And that pretty much continues right up until the present day.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. Yeah, no, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Can you give us a broad overview of like what it does? Like when you're say I want to partner with Proof, what steps am I going to take to set up an account, to work with you, to start getting data and analytics back on my process?
Sure. It's fully SaaS, right? We do offer services as well. Some of it natively, most of it through partners, right? And we have two products. One is Proof MRM, which is really more of an ERP for marketing.
Okay.
So it does, it's where you do planning and budgeting and compliance and digital asset management and all that kind of stuff. And that's not really about analytics as much as that's more like the accountability end of the equation as opposed to optimization. It's the only MRM tool that is available natively on Salesforce Lightning.
Okay.
So that's it's a very, very big advantage just on the data management side alone, right, for customers, because they can activate Proof MRM on their Salesforce platform. And if, let's say, they have subscriptions to 4 Salesforce clouds, all the relevant data from those clouds will automatically download into Proof MRM in the right place, in the right way, and stay current, right? So
nice.
That's a really big deal. We're also very workflow architected, and which is, our competitors have great product. They really do. I'm not just saying that. They have great product, but they're more legacy, right? And so they don't really have our same architecture. And then we're about 1/8 of their price. So that's sort of our high velocity transactional sell as a business, right?
Okay.
You could say that kind of gives us our cash flow base, right? Way of looking at it. And then Proof MMM, right, is the analytics platform, and it is native on AWS because it has to be fully agnostic for platform, because it has to be able to take data from anywhere. It is ported into the Salesforce platform product, MRM, so that you can consume everything through one pane of glass if you're an MRM customer. But you don't have to do that. You can consume it natively on AWS as well. The way that you would get started is we sell it. So we're essentially selling this on a use-based model. And so every model has a price to it, right? Usually it's around $5,000-$6,000 a year per model. And you say, hey, you know what? I've got my permissions. I'm into it, right? I can create work groups where different organizations within my company or outside my company can contribute data securely into this whole thing. We want to do that. We can begin to import data from either automatically or through flat file upload. So there's a data management aspect to this. But then you kind of, what we were talking about earlier, you sit down and with all the deciders, and you say, what do we really want to know? Like, what is our top 20 most pressing decisions, most pressing questions that we need to model and better understand? And those are so predictable at this point. It's just nuts, right? I mean, it's just, and so, everybody has their little tweak on those questions, but the core questions are all the same.
Yeah.
So, so then you basically, you have an analyst either on staff, or you've contracted with one, or we also sell it as a managed service where we're doing this for you. And you create the model to answer that question. You arm it with the data. When you hit compute, right, it will give you an answer. And then every time that model is provisioned with new data, whether that's API or flat file upload, however you're choosing to do it, right, it will automatically recompute the model. And so in its most mature sense, which is where most customers ultimately evolve to this, right, it's all API flows, right? And so let's say you're a retailer, and all your average measurement cadence, this is all time series data. Business is time series data. And so let's say you're measuring pretty much everything on an hourly basis, certainly on a daily basis, right? And that's coming through to the model, and it's recalculating the model at that latency, at that speed, right? And so that means that your analytics are now always at the clock speed of the business.
So can you talk a little bit, just here in these closing minutes, of sort of, we've mentioned a couple of times this idea of the proof GPS. Do you mind talking about what that is and how it factors into these products?
Yeah, I mean, so basically so Proof GPS is the MMM product. Okay. And we call it that because because of the automated recalculation and the way it all shows up on the screen, the way we presented it on the screen, it actually is exactly like a GPS, right? So it's saying, hey, this is where I am right now on this particular question, and this is my business goal over here, right? And I have to get there. And so your forecast is your route, right? So, or if you want to flip it around, when you're using a GPS on your phone and it gives you 3 choices on routes to your restaurant, right? You pick one. Those are all forecasts, right? You're picking one and you're running with it, right? And then it's tracking your progress, and it's also, unbeknownst to you, invisibly to you, it is tracking all of these factors around you that could either speed you up or slow you down. In Proof, that is the roughly 2/3 of every model that is stuff you don't control, right? That can either be a headwind, a tailwind, a crosswind. It can just, so it keeps computing. Proof keeps computing and showing it to you, showing your progress. It can show you, hey, guess what? You have to attain this particular value contribution by this date, and you're no longer going to be able to make that date unless you make some changes, right? Spend more money, whatever it is, right? Spend it more wisely, whatever it can be. And so you can war game that kind of response right there on the screen and see how this can go and correct. And you can, if it means you need more money, you can, and I've actually done this in meetings with customers, you can show them, hey, show the business guys, hey, you know what? Don't take our word for it. This is a business decision, right? We can either be late with this in terms of achieving your goal, or we can be on time, but being on time means it's going to cost another $3 million. Is it worth it to you? Is it worth $3 million to be on time? That's a purely subjective, opportunity cost oriented decision. And so that is one of the things that I loved about it at Honeywell. So this is all obviously pre-proof and pre-automation, but I could have those conversations with the business and say, look, I'm not grinding an axe here. I'm not being Mr. Pro marketing, right? I'm giving you your options based on the analytics. What do you value? What do you want to do? Right? Because the business is the denominator. Marketing is the numerator in this equation. So let's not act like marketing is somehow a denominator when it's not.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah. Well, we're getting sort of to the end of the hour. Do you want to sort of put out there where people could maybe connect with you as an individual, or if they're interested in checking out Proof product, where they can check that out?
Sure. So the website is proofanalytics.ai. There's a lot of information there. I'm probably known for being very active on LinkedIn. And so if you want to reach me there, that's a lot of times the best way to reach me. You can also reach me on Twitter still. Can't promise you how much longer that's going to last, but it's at Mark Stouse is the Twitter handle. Email generally not so hot, right? So really, those 2 social media channels are really the best way to reach me. And I do respond, right? I mean, I won't just accept your connection and not respond. I always respond.
Great. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us, Mark. It was really insightful. And I think your perspective on some of these things is unique to what, I mean, we've done more than 300 interviews at this point and talked to a lot of marketers, but some of the insights that you've created, I think, or that you mentioned are things that I don't think I've heard before. So thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. I mean, they're insights that no one can get outside of an analytical construct. You can't intuit a lot of this stuff, right? You just can't. It's not humanly possible. So any credit for that goes to math, right? Being able to actually run it and see it and say, okay, that's what's really happening. I get it now, right? That's really what I meant earlier when I said that it makes you a better person. It makes you see the world more clearly. It's kind of like physics. I'll wrap up this way. It's like physics. Physics is both math. It's a mathematical way of understanding the way the world works. And because of that, it's also a philosophy of how the world works. And analytics is it's the same deal, right? It's you understand go-to-market because of analytics, and you can't help but influence your philosophy about go-to-market.
I love that. Well, I guess then that'll be it. So thanks again. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Huge shout outs to math and Mark's old math teachers and everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. We'll see you guys next time.